another tutorial. By popular demand, I am doing a recording template tutorial inside of FL Studio. Because everyone enjoyed the last one, the recording template inside of Pro Tools, and I got some questions about how to do it inside of FL Studio, I decided I'd set up a tutorial inside of FL for you guys who work in FL. So real quick, before we get started, I'm going to show you, if you stay tuned to the end of the video, I'm going to show you how to make that template show up right here and how to have FL open it. By default, every time you open up FL and make a new project, it'll open up your recording template for all you heavy lifters inside of FL who are doing everything in FL. But before we get into anything else, let's talk about our front screen because it looks completely empty, but right now I have my recording template open. So real quick, you can press R as long as you don't have your piano keyboard enabled. You can press R to quickly enable and disable recording, and you can press Control M to enable and disable your metronome. And what you can do is have your countdown before recording enabled. I have it set to 1 bar. If you're working at faster tempos like 160, 180, you might want to have it set to 2 bars, but usually 1 bar is good enough. The last thing up here is loop recording, which some artists prefer to work this way, where you loop a section of the song and they do all their takes once and then they move on to the next section of the song and you do all the comping later. That's all I wanted to talk about on this side. What we're going to do is jump over to the other screen now and take a look at what we have here. So first things first, you can see the track 2 is a beat. So whenever you load up a beat, you would want to put it on insert track, on mixer insert track 2. And the first thing we have here is a fruity balance, which is just doing some gain staging. It's bringing the beat down 6.6 dB. This is for beats that are heavily limited or uploaded straight to YouTube and stuff like that. YouTube beats, you will find that they're very heavily limited and you don't have headroom to work with your vocals and doing your mix. So you need to lower the beat down before you think of anything else, just to give yourself headroom. Last thing we have is the T-Rex 5 Precision Comp Limiter. This is an emulation of a Neve unit. This is for situations where the beat is just lacking a little bit. The kick isn't hitting hard enough, the bass isn't making you shake, the high end isn't sizzling the right way. You just need a little bit more. I very rarely have to use it, but it's handy to have when you need it. So the input is set to 0. The output gain on the compressor and the limiter is set to 0, so I'm not adding any gain. The threshold, I will adjust on both of these so that I'm doing about 4 dB of compression and limiting. And the recovery on the compressor is set to slow. On the limiter, it's set to fast. And on the ratio for the compressor, it's set 3:1. And on the attack for the limiter, it's set to fast. And that will get you right where you need to go. Then we have vocal aux and background vocal aux. I have these pinned to the left. You can dock them. Normally they would be on the right, so they'd be separating my vocals and all that. But I have it to the left so that wherever I am in the mix, I can adjust my lead vocals, my background vocals, my beat, my mix bus, and my master. Next we have recording, comping, and recording aux. So the recording and comping tracks are the 2 tracks I use for recording, and I send them to this aux for preview purposes to listen back to while recording. This one I would set the input. I'm not going to do it right now because it would create a lot of feedback, but I would record straight onto there with no effects on there, and I would comp on this one. That's just how I'm used to working inside of Pro Tools, but with the way that loop recording and audio straight into the playlist inside of FL works, you could get by with only 1 recording track, and that would feed into the recording aux, which has a M auto pitch, which is basically a free auto tune. And if you have the right version of FL, it comes with Pitcher, which is what you can use if you don't have an auto tune plugin. I personally don't like the way it sounds, but this is the plugin right here. It would slow down the retune speed, turn on the formant, and set the key to the proper key of your song. That's how you would use it. But I personally don't like the way it sounds, so I don't use it. The other thing we have is Howard Benson vocals, and for that I will jump to the other screen to show you this absolutely gas plugin. So what we have right here is my tracking preset, and This is like a CLA killer. If you like CLA vocals, this plugin kills it. This thing kills it. It's got everything CLA vocals has plus more. So on the vocal section, you have the input gain. I have that turned up a bit, and I have the tube warmth turned on. I have the compression turned up. The gain is left alone, and you can set it to auto gain if you want. You can also shift and double click while playing the audio to calibrate the input, so it'll set it. The only thing is it sets the input pretty hot, the levels, and I like to have a lot of headroom, so I don't like using it that way. I like to set it myself. Then a de-esser, you can hold shift while listening back to hear the DS signal, and then you can adjust your de-esser based on that. And then some grit turned in there. Then I have the EQ, it's going pre-compressor, and it's got the high pass filter turned on. You can turn on the lo-fi. I have that set on for some of my background vocals, but not for the lead vocals while I'm tracking. Then a multiplier, so basically a doubler. Then some stereo width, spreading the image, and a mono low end button. A delay, which I set to lo-fi, quarter note, stereo, turned up a bit, and then some reverb, which is turned up a little bit, but the size is huge, so it's a wide space, but just mixed in a little bit, and then I have the limiter turned on there. So next, what we have is the rest of the vocal chain, or the rest of the vocal tracks, lead, lead 2, and hook. So real quick, on all of my vocal tracks, I leave the first insert open for autotune because I like to do my autotune pre-effects. That's the best way to do it because some things like EQ and compression will affect the way that the autotune reacts to certain notes and frequencies. So it's best to do your autotuning and all your tuning first. We have lead, lead 2, and hook. So the reason I have 2 lead tracks is because sometimes you have overlapping in lead vocals. There's punch-ins that come in a little bit early, whether it's like an 8th note or a 16th note, whatever. So I have the 2 tracks so I can just overlay them and send them to the next track and move on. Then I have a hook track. It has a micro shift on it, which is basically doing a little bit of pitch shifting, chorusing, stereo widening, and that just makes my hooks stand out a little bit more. And all 3 of these tracks are feeding my vocal aux, which has my vocal chain on it. So we will now jump back to the other screen to take a look at the vocal chain. First things first, an SSL channel strip, filtering out everything above 19K and below 100 Hertz. And that's filtering the input and the sidechain of the compressor and gate. On the EQ, we are boosting 220 Hertz by 2 dB. We are cutting 500 Hertz by 4 dB with a tight Q. At 2.5 with a wide Q, we're boosting 2 dB. And right at 8K with a shelf, we're boosting 2.5 dB. I have the gate turned on. Sometimes I use it, sometimes I don't. Depends on the tracking situation, how noisy the recording was, etc. I have my compressor set to fast, attack, and hard mode. I adjust my threshold so I'm getting about 3 to 6 dB of compression on the loudest bits, fast release, and a ratio of 6. And I'm going EQ into compressor, then I go into an API EQ into an 1176 compressor. And for my API EQ, I have the settings at 200 Hertz, boosting 3 dB, 1000 Hertz, boosting 3 dB, 3 kilohertz, boosting 3 dB, shelf on the top end 10K, boosting 3 dB, and the low end is a shelf too, and I engage the preamp to get that API saturation. Then my 1176 compressor, I have a slow attack set to 3 and fast release set to 7, 4:1 ratio, and my input and output is set to 24. Basically, I will play between the 30, the dot here, the 24, the dot there, and the 18, and I usually set them exactly the same for my gain staging, but it just depends on how loud it's tracked. Then I'm running into a de-esser. It's a 2-band de-esser with a 24 dB per octave slope. I'm doing more on the de-essing, and I'm doing slow on the slower side, and I'm not using the soft mode, and it's filtering off everything above 7K. So that's my vocal chain. Then I have on the other screen we will jump to, we have the background vocals. So I've got doubles, ad-libs, in and outs, background left, background right. And these 2 background ones are basically for harmonies. So for doubles, I have a vocal doubler. I always keep it at separation 100, variation 30 every time I use the vocal doubler. And then I just play with the amount and whether I want the effect only or not. Then I'm going into the Howard Benson vocals. Then I'm going into ad-libs. I have the micro shift. I have the vocal doubler doing effect only, amount 50. Then I have a pan man, which is auto panning the ad-libs across the stereo field. And then Howard Benson vocals. Then we have the in and outs. That's got a micro shift, a vocal doubler, which is doing the effect only, amount all the way up, and Howard Benson vocals. Then we have the background left, which has a little altar boy, which I will pitch shift and format shift, a little bit of drive, and a little bit of mix. Then it has a micro shift, a vocal doubler, a pan man set to smooth left, and then a Howard Benson vocals. And then I have a background right, which has another little altar boy doing the same, a micro shift, a vocal doubler, a pan man on the smooth right, and a Howard Benson vocals. And that's feeding a background vocal aux, which is just compression into EQ. So if you take a look at the screen over here, we have an opto compressor with 2 input, 5 ratio, attack at 10, release at 30, 6.2 on the compression, and the output at the default 2.2. Then an EVQ set to the mic mode with filter off everything below 270 and above 3.9. Then at 330 with a low shelf, I'm cutting out 3 dB. With 560 at a high Q, I'm boosting 3 dB. At 1.5 with a high Q, I'm boosting 3 dB. And at 3.3 with a shelf, I'm cutting 3 dB. And those two auxes are feeding a vocal bus. So I have the vocal aux, background vocal aux, that's going into a vocal bus, which is a T-Rax suite. And we will jump back to the other screen to take a look at that. It's got an LA2A. I like to keep this around 1 to 2 dB of compression. It's set to the limit mode. And then I go into my bus compressor. My bus compressor settings are always the same. It's 4:1 ratio, attack 30, release 0.1, high pass 250, grid enabled. Threshold I will adjust to get 4 dB of compression, and the makeup I leave at the default 2.2. So next, what we can take a look at is all of our rounding auxes. So the lead vocal aux is going into a bunch of different tracks. The vocal delay, the vocal verb, the throw, the saturation, the O-Vox, and the vocal sidechain, which I will explain at the end. And then we have the background vocals, which is going to the background vocal delay, the reverb, the throw, and the O-Vox. And all of these effects here are being fed into the effects bus, which has a bus compressor, a mid-side matrix, which is a free stereo imaging plugin. It's like the Wave Center image. What you can do with it is just cut 2 dB in the mids and boost 2 dB in the sides, just to keep your effects on the edge. And then I have the vocal sidechain going into this and basically ducking the effects every time the lead vocals come in. So let's take a look at our effects. For the vocal delay, I have Echo Boy using a preset. I have micro shift. Then for my background vocal delay, I have Valhalla frequency echo on quarter note. And then it's going into a primal tap with my preset. Then I have micro shift. And then I have a side chain. Just because the background vocal delay is very ambient, I have it set to the vocal side chain, so every time the lead vocals come in, it cuts this out. Then my vocal reverb has a micro shift before the reverb, and then we can go to the other screen to take a look at the reverb, which is a plate reverb going into a room reverb, so it's a stacked reverb. And if we go back to the other screen, what we can take a look at is the next effect, which is the Juno chorus, set to both modes with the rate. It's at 1. I think it's at whole notes. The depth up, the phase minimum, and then the mix is somewhere around 70-75%. And then we have the vocal throw, which has a tube delay with a little bit of drive. The tempo sync set to right around 8th notes, I believe. What is that? 8 beats per bar or whatever. and then the feedback is cranked up to like 60%. The mix is set to like 75%. The tone, I'm cutting a little bit of bass and I'm boosting a little bit of treble. And that's going into a studio rack, which has CLA Epic. I'm doing the throw delay and the crowd delay going into the plate reverb, the hall reverb, and the space reverb. And that is going into a towel reverb too, which has the dry and wet pretty much balanced out, a good amount of pre-delay, max room size, stereo width all the way up, stereo input, and a little bit of EQ. Then we have my vocal saturation, which is a patcher, and it's got 3 effects in it. It's got my 1176 with fast attack, fast release, all buttons in. Then we have a decapitator with the punish mode on, drive up. I'll play with the mode depending on how the vocal sounds. The thump engaged, no low cut, bright mode, a little bit of high cut set to the steep mode, and mixed in about halfway. And then we got Devil Lock Deluxe with about halfway crush, a little bit more than halfway crunch, fast release, about halfway darkness, and about halfway on the mix. And that's my vocal saturation. And then I have Ovox. And then the first thing I'm doing is Little Altar Boy, which I'm pitch shifting everything up an octave, and then I'm formant shifting it down a fifth. I'm adding a little bit of drive, and I'm mixing it in. And then I'm doing a Ovox effect, which what you can do instead of this effect, which I recommend this plugin instead if you have the money for it, is Isotope Vocal Synth. It's absolutely gas, but I'm going to show you what I'm doing instead of that. So the first things first, I have a doubler, which is mixed in. It's a guitar doubler, and then I'm going into an Ovox, which it has both synths engaged. The first one is a low one, and the second one is a high one. So for the low one, I turn it up an octave, and I turn it down a fifth. And for the second one, the high one, I turn it down an octave, and I formant shift it up a fifth. I'm turning up some of the sibilants or turning it down. I have the correction set to hard. I'm high passing, turning up the voice. Then I'm turning up the Ovox and turning up the tone. And I'm leaving the output alone, and I'm turning on the limit. I will set this based on the key of the song, the key, and I will set from scales. I will either set it to major or minor pentatonic, depending on the beat. And all of that is feeding the effects bus. And then lastly, I will go into the vocal sidechain. So I'm taking the lead vocals and I'm feeding the vocal sidechain. It's actually not being output anywhere. It's just being used to, for routing. And I have an EQ, which is basically set to cut off everything below 1500 and everything above 8K, and it's boosting everything right around 3K. And then a Fruity Peak controller, which basically dips the volume down when the vocals come in. So I use that to control different things. For one example, I have the beat over here, this mid band on the EQ, which is post effects, I believe. But I have that linked to that controller. So it's set to the peak. So every time the vocals come in, it dips the beat in those specific frequencies to make the vocals stand out more. So next we have the mix bus, which has a fruity balance, which I will use for gain staging and macro dynamics processing. So basically throughout on the intro I'll fade it in, and then on the verses I'll keep the track at like -0.9, and on the hooks I'll keep it up at 0 so that my hooks stand out a little bit louder than my verses. Then we have the T-Rack suite, which is doing my mix bus processing, which we will jump to the other screen to see. I have the bus compressor. Then I have a master EQ set to mid-side mode. On the output, I'm bringing it down to 2 dB for the gain staging. On the low shelf at 100, I'm boosting 1 dB. On the high shelf, I'm boosting 1 dB. On the low end at 11 Hertz, I'm with the tightest Q, I'm cutting out 6 dB. At 2800, I'm boosting 1.5 dB with the widest Q, and at 19K with the widest Q, I'm boosting 1.5 dB. On the sides, I'm cutting the lows at 100 Hz by 2 dB, and I'm boosting the highs by 2 dB. At 85 with the widest Q, I'm cutting out 6 dB. At 2400 with the widest Q, I'm cutting out 2 dB to make space for the vocals. And at 25K with the widest Q, I'm boosting 1.5 dB to give a little bit of extra space. On my stereo imager, from 0 to 100, 150, I'm cutting it into mono. From 150 to 1K, I'm letting it go slightly stereo. And then from 1K to 10K, I'm boosting it up a little bit. It's at 150. And from 10K and above, it's at 200% for the stereo imaging. Then on my Fairchild, I'm doing a mastering compressor. I have the time constant set to 1. Occasionally, I will play with it depending on how the vocals, the beat, and the kicks sound. You know, the kick and the bass. I might play with that. The input gain is set to -6, and the threshold is set to 3. And then I have a clipper, which I will play with the slope depending on the track. My output is set to -0.3, and my gain I will either leave alone or boost up to 2 dB. But when I'm mixing, I'll turn it up a lot more just to hear the clipping. Then, lastly, so on the mastering section, we have a few different plugins. We have 2 different limiters and then 3 analysis plugins. So the first limiter is the L1, and we're using L1 Plus, which is the Ultra Maximizer, because it has a true peak limiting, and it's set to -3.5 and -0.3, and the release at 0.09 set to auto release. That's the same between the 2 different limiters. What changes is these 3 settings. The quantize for my wave bounce is set to 24 bits with no dither. On my MP3 bounce, however, I have the quantize set to 16 bits, the dither to T2, and the shaping to maximum. Then we have the monitoring plugins. This is for checking your mix. First thing is Panipulator. It's a free panning plugin. You can check your mix in mono with that real quick. Then we have the frequency analyzer and the loudness analyzer. So for that, let's jump to the other screen. First, we have the frequency analyzer. I have it set from 1 Hz all the way up to 31K, and from -100 dB all the way up to 1.4 dB. So past clipping, and it's set to true peak. So I can monitor my full frequency and loudness spectrum right there. And I have a phase correlation meter that shows me whether I'm in phase or not. So I can do most of my monitoring right there. Then for the loudness meter, I have the free Ulian loudness meter 2. I have it set to stereo, EBU R128S1, and I will monitor this throughout the track. I set it to 3 minutes, but depending on the track, it could be 4 minutes, it could be 2 minutes, depending, but 3 is a good default point. So that's that for my mastering chain. And that's everything in my recording template. So we can jump back to the other screen. The other thing is I keep this one track 1, open a little bit bigger just so I can open the beat and have it put on there. That's where the sampler is for track 2. That's just open by FL by default. But yeah, so you can go ahead and hit save and just save that template somewhere. And now I will show you how to install it. So let's close FL. And what we're going to do is we're going to go into 2 different folders. First, the folder that you saved your recording template. And then second, the FL templates folder. So if you don't know how to get here, I'm going to show you right now. So you go into your local disk, your program files, image line, whichever version of FL you have. I bought FL, so I have lifetime free updates, and that's the current version is 20. You go to data, templates, and right there, that's your templates folder. So I recommend making a folder for yourself. So I have my own folder there just for organization, but you can honestly just drag it right on there and it'll show up inside FL. So when you open up FL, let's take a look. You have the option view from template right there. And if you go to change default template, you can set your default template right here to your recording template and set your startup project to default template so that every time you open up FL, it will open up your recording template so you're up and ready to go. So that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you all for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, share. Please let me know what you guys think. And if you guys get me to 100 subscribers, I will release an FL Studio recording template made of stock plugins for free. So keep a lookout for that. Get me up to 100 subscribers and I'll get you guys all that. So thank you all for watching. This is Sad Boy Music signing off.